Hi everyone, just a quick little extra piece here at the beginning of the video to say that the video today, just to avoid confusion, the video today on Monday the 4th is going to be showing how the different markers like Ohuhu, Caliart and stuff do on like Amazon paper versus marker paper, and we're going to be using a variety of different types of papers and markers, and I'm not really coloring anything substantially. It's just we're hopping between a bunch of different things. But Wednesday I am going to show you guys like how I color, and we're going to try first with some marker paper, and I'm going to do some blending. With these, I'm going to do a little bit of outlining, and you're going to see me start on a page in this book. So, and then next week I'm going to do the same thing. We should still have a marker video on Monday, and then on Wednesday I'll be getting more in-depth in coloring a page, and that one will be from some Hannah Lynn books. So, if you really want to see like in-depth how I color, that's where that's going to be, is going to be on Wednesdays. Today's video is more of an overview. I don't even think I have really any notes for today's video. It's just more showing how I do use markers on different types of paper and how they do from the sets that I showed you guys last week. So, hope you guys enjoy. Thanks. So, I'm re-recording parts of the second part of this video just because I didn't like how they came out, the previous recording. If this portion seems a little haphazard, it's probably because I'm cutting in different types of testing and so on. One additional tip I did want to note that you'll see me probably do in more detail, I don't know, maybe next week, is a lot of times when it comes to big spaces, particularly backgrounds, and I'll be showing a lot of backgrounds in this testing because these are the large areas that I feel like you're really going to notice if a marker is going to streak or give you different results. A lot of times, you know, even I have an issue with being compelled to fill in like the backgrounds of pages. Particularly if they're just open like this one. I was trying to look at a different one like this one. But really, unless I have a super juicy marker that covers great, I'm going to wind up with a streaky background if I'm just using markers, and it gets really frustrating. Even for me, nothing makes me madder than a marker that's running out of ink right in the middle of using it. So a lot of times I will like maybe do a circle with her, like just a particular shape that's only taking up part of the page. Like that would be good because it'd be like a spotlight on her. You could also, one of the things I really like doing is using a background color as just an outline. So just going around her with a strip of the marker color. You can make it as wide a strip or as thin a strip as you want, but like it gives the illusion of a background color and a background without trying to fill the whole page. And then of course you could just use marker on this part of the image and then use like distress ink or pastel or something that's not marker on the actual background. So I would say like a tip would be choosy about your marker backgrounds. And hopefully I'm not repeating myself, and this is just from the footage I'm not going to show, but if all goes bad, you can just use a black marker. A black marker is your like little black dress here. Like it helps with everything. So, well, not everything, but let's say you do decide you're going to color this background with marker and it dries out halfway through, it gets really streaky, or maybe you hate the color. You could always pick up a good solid black marker and go back over that color. That black is going to cover up just about anything I haven't found anything a good black alcohol marker can't cover. When it comes to marker colors and things like that. Now there's certain things that like alcohol marker is not going to cover up, but like in terms of color, if I hate how something went wrong with this background, I can just black out the background and it'll look great. I think black backgrounds are actually one of my favorite colors to use just because they make the image itself pop out so much. You could also use black paint. You don't necessarily have to use a marker. A paint will probably cover more things than a marker would, so you could do that too. But yeah, if disaster strikes, you know, and it doesn't even have to be the background. It could be like, maybe you don't like the color of her hair, so you just black out her hair. But you could do that with like little details, like maybe there's a bunch of details in the background and you just don't want to color all those. Like maybe you just solid black out all the details in the background. Like maybe you don't want this curtain back here. This book gives you, that little line's odd. This book gives you the option of with a background or without. But let's say you didn't have that option and you just want her in the image. Maybe you don't like this curtain in the back. Like this is a weird line. Oh, there's one over here too. Okay, well as long as it matches. Oh, because that's supposed to be like the light on her. I get you now. Anyway, if I decided I didn't want any of this, I could just black it out. Same here. All these stars, everything behind her, I could just black that out. So, I need to update my notes because I don't think I included those tips in there. If you can think of any tips you've picked up while coloring, please feel free to leave those in the comments. Alright, so I want to try to do some detail work, but for the most part we're going to be testing these on big areas just because this is really going to show you whether it streaks, what happens with a bigger marker. So this is from, by the way, Whimsy Girls Through the Decades coloring book. It's probably different than what I showed you in the beginning because I've kind of changed my tactics here and I need to move quickly because my previous attempt took a lot longer than I expected. So here we're going to try just a light blue, which would be a standard type of color for the background that you would use on a lot of different pages. I'm going to try the Magic Box markers. This is a sky blue from my mostly untouched box that I just bought back in May that's been stored on its side. This is pretty much what you would call a fresh marker, except it's been stored for a little bit. And this Ohuhu I just picked up in that 40 set that I talked about in the earlier video as well. So we're going to do both sides. I'm going to color one side with one marker and basically show you like how I color with alcohol markers in big spaces for this piece. Sorry, there's something on my screen that doesn't want to go away. Okay, there it goes. And how I try to combat streakiness. Alright, so couple things. I like to try, if there's a way to break a picture into sections and just color to that point. Yes, it does create a little bit of a line, but it's a lot easier than trying to color like one big swatch like this all at the same time. And it does give a little bit of a line, and I'll show you what that is here in a minute, but it's a whole lot easier than trying to color like this all at the same exact time in one swoop, because phones ring, kids need things, cats jump on your lap, like all kinds of things happen where you may have to suddenly stop coloring. And with markers, I have to get to a certain stopping point before I can stop coloring with them once I start, or else you're gonna more likely get a streaky experience. So we're going to start with the low budget marker. Now, what do I typically do? I would start and my goal is to quickly cover as much of the page as possible. So I work, it's really hard to show it this way. I should have turned the camera slightly. I wonder if I can do, well, see, I've started, now I can't stop. So I work back and forth across the section using the chisel tip. On large areas, you want to use either the chisel tip or the brush tip if it's a good brush tip, like a Copic. However, so I don't usually go straight up and down or anything like that. I just work from that section out. And however, we do reach a point where the section is so wide that because this isn't a super saturated marker, it will start to create those lines. You can kind of see that happening here. So with a lower budget marker, you're probably going to have that happen. One way that I found instead is to go straight up and down from the top and bottom of the page. Use the widest point of your chisel. So my chisel is pointed like that way. And it does squeak a little. A squeak is a good sign of there not being a lot of pigment in the marker too. So once that dries, you're going to see probably a little bit of a line just because it dries so quickly. However, it's not as noticeable like if it's all going in the same direction. So if you're going a bit slower, and now you can see I'm working, filling in that section as well. So we're going to give that a little bit to dry, and then we're going to continue on down here. While it's drying, let me see if I can make this easier to see what I'm doing. That might work. It's a little bit of a weird angle, but that might show you more of what I'm doing than I was before. So this section would be probably a stopping point, not as much as I would like, because I would like there to be less space here, but if this was all I had to work with, like my next stopping point probably would be like right here. So I basically would have to just keep going in this whole section. So again, we're going to this right here. If I'm coloring a large area, I'm going back and forth like this. No rhyme or reason, no lines. I just happen to be going up and down because that was the direction I started in. If you really want to make sure, your goal is to basically keep a wet line of marker going at all times. And I'm sure I've mentioned this before when I was really talking about the paper, but your weather and humidity also plays a factor. So like I have an overhead fan going on in here, but it is extremely humid today. So I'm probably going to have slightly less streaking. So now I'm going to try my vertical up and down. So again, I'm going to turn it on its side so that this long angled part, the widest part of the area on the marker, to cover the most area. And then I'm just going to work my way up and down, trying to keep straight vertical lines. I'm a very impatient colorist. I don't like to have to take my time. Not usually. So I just wanted to show you both ways. So if you do have these types of markers that do streak as you're coloring large areas, and you'll see that here in a minute, this is a good way to, they'll still streak, but it won't, it'll look a little cleaner. Like it looks almost kind of like a textured background if it's all in one direction, right? So large areas like this or mid-size areas, I just go in with a chisel tip. This, I know I'm making it look easy, but I've had 5 years of using chisel tips, so there's two things going on here. A, I'm used to using these in smaller areas, and B, I don't care if they leak a little. On Amazon paper, if you have a really juicy marker, one thing I would recommend is, and you'll see this more with a juicy marker, but because of the way Amazon paper soaks up marker, a lot of times it will cause a lot of feathering if there's a really juicy marker. So a way past that is when you're coloring, don't quite go all the way to the line art. It's one of the reasons I like thicker line art on Amazon paper, because that feathering happens less often because it has further to go than it would in like a thin line art, right? So it has to get past this really thick piece of line before you can see it in the fan. But if you're having that problem, color up to, like right up to that line art. So you can see I'm not quite going all the way to the line art. And what it will do, if it's a juicy marker, is it will soak in the rest of the way. You can tell this one isn't as juicy as other markers because it's not actually soaking in to that extra space. So looking at this background, it's kind of dry, but you can see when I'm talking about streaking, this is what I'm talking about. So here you can't see it as much up here, but I was getting a little bit of streakiness when I was doing my standard just go across the page. Then I started doing the vertical, and you're still getting the streaks, but it at least looks textured, right? It doesn't look as all over the place as this section right here. Like this section, this was where how I normally color, and you can just see it dried so quickly that it was darkening the lines every time I went back over it. So you're getting this real obvious line happening. So if you don't mind this and you're budget conscious and you just like putting marker on paper, maybe you like just doing color by numbers, and like this is like you're fine with this, that is so cool because there's so many options for you out there. And so you know, this is a judgment-free zone here. Basically, if you don't mind that, you have all kinds of marker opportunities open to you. However, and when I color by numbers, a lot of times I don't mind. A lot of these budget markers, this budget set, this magic box, will go mostly to my color by numbers because they're smaller, especially the smaller sections, because they don't do this as much in detail work. But if it does bother you, that I want to test these to show you which markers do this and which don't. And that's why I was talking about the budget markers having some cons, and this is one of them. If they have more alcohol in the ink than they do ink, or if they don't have as much overall ink in the marker and they dry out faster, these are the results you're going to see, particularly on a really thirsty page like Amazon paper. Now, what will be interesting is what you see what happens when you get on a less thirsty paper like marker paper. This happens, but happens not as much as you think because the ink stays on the surface longer. So yeah, but when you see I did the up and down, there is just a slight line, but it's not as obvious. So yeah, so this side was the magic box. I'm not going to be able to show you every marker, but we're going to do an oh-hoo-hoo on the other side. And I don't really care about up here. If I generally cut, so this book is complex images and then a simpler version, and this is like the simpler. If I ever come back and color this, like, I'm just going to black out the background. So I don't mind sacrificing this picture. So this is going to be a little bit darker blue. And the first way I'm going to color is like I typically do, where I just work back and forth. If you get a section like this, you just start working out from this section. The thinner the paper, the faster it soaks up the ink, the faster you want to color on the surface with the alcohol marker to reduce the chance of lines. This is a slightly darker color. That is something too to keep in mind with, you know, not all sky blues are the same. A sky blue in a hoo-hoo may look like this, when a sky blue in the magic box markers might look different. Alright. So here, I think we're going to try to do the up and down vertical line I was doing before, which is probably going to leave a little bit of a line because I'm not getting back to this original piece that quickly, but I was just curious. You can see for some of this I am feathering over a little into the image itself. I'm messy when I color. That may bug people. I don't sweat it. Usually by the time I get done with a picture, it's not that noticeable. So like here, in her neck area, I'm not going to go all the way up to her neck. I'm just going to go a little bit out. However, you can see how it's soaked in and actually filled in that little bit of that line I left. So you can tell just from that that this is like a really juicy marker. So this is like my little end point here, my stop gap section. So we're going to do the same in here. I'm going to color just to the edge of everything. Give it a few minutes to see. You can see it's actually soaking in right up to that point. I left a little more white space here, so I may have to go in and dab that. You can always switch to the fine tip to do that. Generally, if it's that just tiny bits of detail like that, like you're not going to notice any streaking or anything. So, all right, let's go ahead, shift down here, and go ahead and finish out the side. So I've left that sitting there for a few minutes, so let's see what happens. Now look at that, like when I left, you could actually see the wetness of this marker, like the difference in ink in these markers. There's no squeaking. It's a very smooth coloring experience because you've got plenty of ink in the marker. I'm really just going right up to her boa because this soaks in well enough, but this isn't an overly juicy marker either. It feels like a well-balanced marker, I guess. Like, I don't mind an overly juicy marker for a background just because I'm more likely to get the smooth experience I'm looking for, but really truly my ideal marker is a well-balanced marker that is not overly juicy, and I use the word juicy a lot, and I'm not the biggest fan, but where I don't have to try to be super careful when I color close to the lines. Like, I'm just messy. I I don't want to take the time to do that. I just want to be able to color right up to the line. If it bleeds a little bit every now and then, no worries. But if you have an overly juicy marker, that is a way to go. We're going to give that bottom part time to dry, but I'm going to zoom out and show you guys the difference. So on this side was the magic box, on this side was the Ohuhu. And just look, I know this section's still wet, but you can even see here there's not a lot of lines. Look at the difference on the sides of coloring with these markers in big spaces. This one definitely you could tell was a lot, had a lot more ink in it to start with. It didn't dry as quickly, so I could work back and forth. I still worked quickly, as you saw, but it definitely, the same amount of time was put into this as this, and it's a huge difference in the smoothness of that color. So that is why I feel like your medium brand markers, your Ohuhus, your Caliarts, I'd have no doubt that Caliarts would do the same thing here. That's why I feel like your medium brand markers, particularly if you're coloring on Amazon paper and you're coloring in large spaces, are the ideal marker to go with. So now let's look at smaller spaces quickly. I'm going to, what am I going to do? We're going to just color in parts of her fan. Do I have another color I can use? We'll use vermilion, which is like an orange red. So I've got a bullet tip. This is the magic box. I'm coloring right up to the edge because I wanted to see if it would soak up a little bit. Looks like this side did. So you may get a different experience with the fine tip than you do the chisel tip. So for small spaces, I do use the fine tip usually, or a brush tip if it's a chisel tip and a brush tip. So do I have vermilion or something to the equivalent thereof? I have a red in the Ohuhu. So let's use the bullet tip in that. So this one is very dry. Weirdly, the Ohuhu fine tip is feels like a very small, very fine tip. It is not quite as juicy as even the magic box was. However, and it does feel like I have to work at it a bit more to fill in that space. However, that's not necessarily a bad thing. If you're using mandalas or you have a really small space like these, this necklace, you may not want a super juicy fine tip, because if you're doing real detail work like this, that way you only have to touch it a few times. You don't have to worry about it feathering because it's not super juicy. I think if you're starting out and you haven't really got, like, you want to use it for fine details and you're not, see, I just touched that once with my marker and you can see like it filled it in mostly. If I try to do like I did with the other, even just barely touching it, it's hard to see, but you can already see a little bit of bleed, a little bit of feathering out of those, even just barely touching them. So for a detail marker, like for real detail work, you may not want as juicy a fine tip. So the Ohuhu is probably a good pick for you. I personally don't like this. I'd rather have it be juicy even if it feathers a bit, just because I don't do a lot of small detail work with my markers. I typically use gel pens or pencil or something. You know, I don't use markers for a lot of, and I don't do a lot of super detailed mandalas. So this tip is not my favorite, but that doesn't mean, like I said, that it's bad. If you do a lot of mandalas and you do a lot of detail work with your markers, then I think this would, like the Hoo Fine Tips are actually a great marker to start out if you really, if the feathering and the bleed really bothers you in Amazon, on Amazon paper. So, alright, so that's Magic Box and Hoo, and it still took like 30 minutes to do that. Oh my gosh. So, alright, so, another Amazon paper book. I will say on this one, I had trouble. This is Chubby Witches by Deborah Muller. The very first page, when I was blacking out the background, my marker, I used a Copic, and for some reason it was real streaky, and so I actually had to go back over a couple times. So that is unusual for me in Amazon books, so I wanted to see if that's because this is, you know, maybe a lower weight paper than what typically comes in her other books, just where it happened to be printed. So I started this page, and this was in our, I had this in my original video, and that's why part of it's already colored. But I thought this would be also a good place to show you what I'm, a little bit more, sorry I hit the mic, a little bit more what I'm talking about when I'm talking about sections. Man, this piece feels so chaotic because I'm all over the place. I don't think it's going to matter how I do it. So if you have a lot of objects on the page and a lot of sections that are small, and you've got to color a whole section. So in this background, so, per my tips, I would have probably painted this with something. Used a paint, might have blacked it out. I could have easily outlined all the objects and everything in a marker as well. I don't know if I necessarily would have covered this originally, because there's just a lot of objects to have to color around, and that gets to be a pain in the butt. But for the purposes of this demo, I just wanted to show you. So like, you can use Copics in Amazon books. A lot of people grumble about it because the roughness of the paper and the fact that it soaks up ink means that your tips will fray out faster and you'll use up your ink faster. So that is true. However, I am a big advocate of, if I'm going to buy something, I'm going to use it. And I hardly ever use my Copics in my Amazon books, but sometimes I just do. Sometimes they're just easier to use. Their brush tips work really well at covering large areas, which I'm about to show y'all. And sometimes I just like using them. So again, it is a use what you like kind of mentality, kind of vibe here. So I already started here. I'm going to work to this section, and so I'm looking for good places to stop, pick up my marker, and then put it back down. And so we're going to see a little line here where this bottle's at, and there's a little point here where her earring, not earring, but like the hat jewelry is at. And so I'm going to pick up where I left off. The good news I found is, when I started doing this the other day, is it's not as streaky as the black marker was. So it could very well just be my black marker was low on ink. I tend to run out of my black marker very quickly because I use it to black out a lot of backgrounds and stuff. So sometimes I just grab my black Copic because it's easier. Again, I'm just kind of haphazardly coloring. But trying not to let any line sit too long without going back over it. You can see there. So now we go to this section. I'm going to work down to there. A lot of times I'll use little circles in small areas to fill them in easily. But this is a very juicy Copic. It's giving me a relatively smooth surface with a few little streaks here and there. I mean, it's very unusual that I can color a picture completely in marker and it not have a little bit like I'm feathering a bit into the stars because I'm not being super careful and precise. I don't, that's the biggest thing when I color, and I guess why I feel like I can't do like tutorials and stuff, because I'm just not super precise or well honed in my craft, I guess. Like, I just do what works for me and I don't sweat the small stuff. But some of you, like, precision's very important. You don't like to color outside the lines, and that's fine too. Every way to color is the right way to color. So, like, yeah, I went into her hair a bit there. So there's 2 more sections filled in. Typically I would sit here and just do all this at once. I happen to be doing it in bits and pieces here. And like, here's the thing. Let's say I started out with this marker and it just suddenly decided to run dry halfway through this, and it just looks a disaster and I'm not happy with it. Then I just pick up my juicy black marker, or I refill my marker and just go back over it with a black. Like, okay, that didn't work, so. But yeah, I typically wouldn't fill in a background like this unless it was like a black background. But in this case, I wanted to try something different, so. So there's pretty much how I color in Amazon books. If we want to talk about detail, so I'm showing a Copic marker. If I want to talk about detail, what color do I want to use here? Let's use like a yellow. In the Copics, I almost always use the brush tip for everything. The chisel tips in Copics are really small. They're more for like blending detail work. Like, it's the opposite of what you'd expect. It probably would help if I zoomed down, but like I said, I'm not doing a third take of this, so this is gonna be the best I can do. So if you're curious how I use the brush markers, I don't keep them, I just kind of tap the paper with them when I'm doing detail work. I just lightly touch and then move the color. I don't press down real hard, just because the paper's tendency to soak up the ink is going to lead more likely to feathering. Plus, also using this delicate touch, you know, kind of extends the life of the tips. I don't know, and maybe I just don't I say I don't use my markers enough. I use my markers a lot. And when I say, I very rarely have a problem with tips, like especially brush tips, because they're pretty much the most fragile of tips, like messing up on me. Like, it's not, I haven't run into that issue. I know people have, but like me, I've never run into that issue. So, I don't worry about it too much. Now, I'm sure there will come a time and place where I'll have to worry about it. I was just going to show you guys the skin tone I'm using is actually from the Magic Box. This is a burnt orange color. This isn't super detailed work, but I mean, I just use the same approach with any marker. I just work up to the areas there. I accidentally colored a bit into that tattoo. A lot of times if I'm going to go back over it with like glitter gel pens or something, which is probably what I'll do with her tattoos. I'll just work my way back up. This marker feels, and I wanted to show you guys a different marker from that set too that wasn't as light. I found that your lighter colors will also streak more than your darker colors. I'll just fill in this little section down here. So like I, did her face. Her face has a few, if you hold it up, you can see a few little lines like down here around where her cheeks are at. You can see a few little lines, but for the most part, it's still a pretty good surface. Like I said, the budget markers, like their fine tips, are probably, or at least I think, fairly decent to use. So, which I didn't use the fine tip there. I was trying to find a fine tip to use here. So she's got red. What do we want to do? I'm trying to decide. Let's do bright green on the stars. So I'm going to grab the bullet tip from the magic box. Again, this is a juicy marker. You can see it's already trying to bleed out some. So again, I'm doing that very light, feathery touch. Like just really tapping the paper a little bit and then moving away. So this gives it a very Christmassy vibe. That wasn't my intention. However, that is what we have. So I would also do, not like I just did, if you put down a fresh layer of marker somewhere on the paper, I would give it a few minutes to dry before you put your hand on it. If it's wet enough marker, I've seen this happen particularly with like the color purple. Like if I put my hand over it and take it away, like it will fade, because I guess the oils and stuff from your hands, while it's still wet, will interact with it, and it might cause it to fade or do, look different than the rest of your paper. So it's typically not as much problem on the Amazon paper because everything dries so fast, but anyway, I'm going to go ahead and color all these, because if I don't, I'm going to put this marker up and then I'm going to forget, and I'm going to be like, I wanted to finish this page. Can't even see where I'm. So this is from the new fresh box of Magic Box markers. But like I said, I have to be real, just a delicate touch with a really juicy marker, and Amazon paper is the way to go. And it's funny because these are so inconsistent, right? Like that light blue, I would have not had to worry about feathering it like that. But like that green is good and juicy, but it won't stay that way. I prefer the consistency of other marker sets for sure. Like let's look at this one. So this is the glossy premium paper on Amazon. Need some ideas here. I did not adequately prepare for this one. So here I'm going to use a light yellow on the background, and we're going to try the artists pastels. I think that's a good idea. No, I have not swatched any of these small sets. I just haven't had time. So we're going to, that works. Yeah, okay. We'll just use pale yellow. We'll try the Arctics since we haven't used that in a minute. And this is a chisel tip and a brush tip. So let's try the chisel on this side. Now, like I said, this is the glossy paper and it is pre-shaded. I have not tried using marker at all on this type of paper. So this is actually a real like demo. So here I'm just working my way back and forth again, just testing it mostly. I was curious to see if we would get a lot of streaking or a lot of lines. I don't feel like it's putting out a lot of ink, the marker, like it's more like a Copic, maybe like just a little drier than I would like in a marker I'm using on Amazon paper. Let's just say it like that. Generally, I prefer juicier markers on Amazon paper, but because I'm using this on this premium paper, it is not soaking up the ink like the standard paper does. So this would extend the life of your markers. It makes using like a Copic marker easier. Yeah, I'm doing good here. It looks like I'm not getting any streaks, and I'm kind of just haphazardly coloring. It does, like I said, it feels like some of the areas, I'm curious to see what it does if I just scribble back over. Like, is it going to be real obvious or is it going to dry? Again, with a lighter marker too, you get it's a little more forgivable, I guess. Not forgivable, but it's not as obvious when you have the streaks as you would otherwise. If I'd really thought about it, I probably would have picked a lighter yellow than this, but that's fine. That's what we're going to go with. Now I'm using the brush tip on this side just to see. Let me try my just back and forth method. This is not covering as well as like the Copic brush tip. I probably would use these brush tips more for blending than I would for covering large areas. Yeah, that's the thing, like no two brush tips are alike, no two chisel tips are alike, at least in my experience. Depending on the marker, we're just going back to the chisel tip. I will be here all day if I use that brush tip. But y'all saw how quickly I covered that area with the Copic brush tip. So it's just not all brush tips are created equal. Not all chisel tips are created equal. That's where that's where a lot of this testing and playing around with markers comes into play, so that you learn what you like, what you don't like. If you do use multiple sets of markers like I do, you understand like the nuances of them and adjust accordingly. Like I've never used the Arctics before. I wish there was a little more output on the marker. However, it might just be this paper too. We're gonna make her hair. I might use the Copic on her hair. No, I want to use an Ohuhu or something. I'm gonna make her hair red. I think this is just gonna be a very simple, like redhead with some green, this yellow background. I just don't want to leave a big section. Again, I don't want to walk away and leave a big section of the background uncolored, as I do not want to cause like a streak situation. So that did really well. Got a really smooth return on that. No streaks as far as I can see. Let's try some red. Now this is already pre-shaded, and so a lot of times if you have a grayscale picture, one of the things I recommend is always going lighter with your markers. The grayscale will give you the darker, what did I say, red? So in these smaller sets, however, I am limited in the reds I have because I just don't have a lot of, you know, like I said, in a bigger set you might have light reds, medium reds, and dark reds. Here we don't have a lot of that. So maybe instead of doing that, I grab a green instead. We're going to use the vivid green from Ohuhu and do the leaves. Let me grab the chisel tip. So this paper is very interesting. It is definitely different than regular Amazon paper. Regular Amazon paper, you just kind of throw the marker on there and go to town. Here, I feel like I have to be a little more, like, because it's not soaking up the marker as much, there is a chance if I don't color like smoothly enough that some areas might be lighter than they should be. So I'm finding I have to be a little more precise in my coloring on this page, just because it's not soaking in that marker and filling in the areas that maybe I didn't cover as well. So I have to go a little slower on this, but that's good because you're using less marker, and less marker is soaking into the page. You're going to have less, like that was just due to me coloring outside the lines. You're not having an issue with feathering. Let me switch to the bullet tip for this side. I am not a fan of the bullet tip on the Ohuhus because it's not for large areas. For these tiny little flowers, these would be perfect. But you can see coloring this, especially on this paper, because you have to go a little slower, like it feels slow, it feels streaky. It does not feel fun. And you can see here I'm having to go back over little areas that I'm not quite getting. But still does the job. So not too much of a worry there. And then actually let me and this was the exact thing I was afraid of. Was that the yellow I was using? Please be the yellow I was using. I guess we're about to find out. I need to just fill in the rest of this, because if I don't, then I will never remember which marker I'm using. And I need to do that vivid green, I guess. Just remember I used that. Anyway, so this is interesting. So the Amazon premium paper, the glossy paper, gives you more of a, like, I guess, cardstock experience where it stays on the surface longer. I don't know like how this works for blending and stuff. Maybe we can play with that at some point in the future, but I did want to show you guys that. But as you can see, the Arctics and the Ohuhu did really well on this. So I likely included that clip. Last bit of Amazon paper. They do make a premium Amazon paper that is glossy, shiny. It doesn't soak up marker like the regular paper does. So this, if you're, wanting to use Copics, if you're wanting to blend, if you want your ink and your markers to last longer, then making sure you use this type of Amazon paper might be the way to go. Um, I I know Derya Cakirsoy publishes her books in this. Christine Karen, the newest Matchstick Mouse Pumpkin Party book, is also on this type of paper. So you saw in that clip, we did the background here with the Arctic Pastel, and then I did some of the green here. I've been working on it using the red, using this Cali Art. I would like to finish this maybe before the end of the month. I might give her an orangey, like dark orange skin tone or something. What I want to do is test to see if this is going to yellow with these markers. So using a couple different markers on here, I think the green one was Ohuhu, right? Yeah, it was Vivid Green. So you can see these worked really well in here. I don't have any issues with streaks. One thing, however, I did want to do. Let's use her. I want to try this sky blue on this paper, this magic box. So like a budget marker. We don't have to color the whole thing. But what I want to see is, because it's not soaking up as much on this paper, do we still get that streaky experience with a budget marker? Or could you get a better experience with the budget markers on glossy paper? Because it would stand to reason that this should work better. And I'm not super impressed by this little section that I've colored in. I'll probably just black out this background too. I'm trying the up and down line concept. After this, we will show a few other types of paper, because how I color on Amazon paper is different than how I color on other types of paper. Alright, so you can see from the way it's drying, it is still streaking. You're still not getting a super smooth surface. Bummed, because I was really hoping that because it would stay wet on the surface longer. But again, this is another indication of there's probably more alcohol than actual ink in the marker, because it's still drying quickly even on this premium type surface. So you're still going to get streaks, which stinks. Yeah, I wish I had picked a page where I could have just done the blue and blacked out. I could still black out the background. It's fine. Alright, so we are moving on from Amazon paper. Hopefully can show you some of these finished pages. Do want to show you Creative Haven paper, particularly small detail works, particularly the Taotrees markers. Sorry, I know that's shiny on the book. So I haven't really talked about my Taotrees that much in this video, other than the top, show you guys them, but I like to use these in really small detail work. So if I do have mandalas that have a lot of details, if I have a book like George Toufexis, which, if you're not familiar with his work, it has some extremely detailed areas. This might be my favorite one, but like you can see here, I've shown these before, but like I get really great results. So let's do this picture with the cat. And I'll show y'all like some of the detail work here. So, and I might show you some of the other fine tip markers on this. We're going to try to do this quickly. And I know it's washed out. That's a little better. Alright, so that cat, I see 24. It's black. And I bet that's the thing. I think I've used up all my Taotree black markers again because I use them so frequently. Let's instead go to over here in all this greenery. So there's 19 and 10. 10 is just normal green. I'm going to find something in here that resembles a normal green. Okay. So, it's hard to see on here. Actually, I'm going to have to take my glasses off. But like right here, there's a line in this, and it's 10 on the inside of the leaves, and it's 9 on the edges, which is like a yellow green. So you're really I'm only trying to color the insides of these leaves. So the Taotrees, if you remember, have the super fine point. I apologize because that is blurry. And then your chisel tip. So for fine details, I use the fine tip of these. If you want any finer, I think you'd have to buy an actual fine liner. And so I do the same thing. Just in case it's a juicy marker, I just barely touch the page. And just work my way inwards. It's almost like painting at this point where you get this small and detailed. If I go a little bit outside the lines, I definitely don't sweat it on George Toufexis pages. Because honestly, when they're done, I mean, I'm sure there's somebody out there that's looking at my finished picture and is like, oh, she went out of the lines here and there and here and there. But 98% of the people that are looking at my picture are not gonna notice. Now, the longer I leave the mark on the paper, like if I just sit there and put the tip, the more it's going to spread. So that's why I just kind of dab it in. Yeah, this does go down. So I just work my way. I usually work in sections on George Toufexis pages, like with marker. I'll start in the top left and work my way like over and down, which is obviously not what I'm doing here, but I'm trying to show you as much as I can without like just crazy. Wait, what is 9? 9 is actually supposed to be light green. So we're going to take this one, which is 59. Same bullet nib. This one's a little bit drier. I've had my Taotrees for a while. The downside to them is they're not open stock, so I have to get a little creative when I use up one color, and like these books call for, you know, a yellow green or a light green. Sometimes I have to get a little creative in there's another section there. And you know, sometimes if I color a section like here, I'm making a guess. My eyesight's not the best in the world, I'm assuming most of these are 9s. There might be one that's not a 9. It might be an 8 or something. Okay. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's just because I've done this so long. I've just reached the point of the picture's gonna look great when I'm done. If I have to color something that wasn't what its original color was supposed to be, like, is anybody really gonna notice, right? Like, now I'm just coloring some other sections so you can see them on their own as well. Now in bigger detail areas, like there are, you know, some spaces here that are pretty big areas, like for a color by number. I will use the Taotrees, but I'll use the chisel side. I think 12 is like a beige. Yeah, it's a dark beige, which is weird. I kind of have to... Let's do 18, because that's a color, that's a dark brown. Boy, I am going to have to buy a new set soon. Oh, I saw it over here, 98. Alright. So we're going to use the chisel on the back part of this. Usually I start off just dabbing it because I don't know how juicy these markers are. And they can be juicy. These can... Sometimes you have to be a little careful with them, because they can come out of the gate pretty juicy. Now here I'll switch from chisel to fine tip when I get close to like some of the edges that are like detail work. But for covering the large areas, I'll use the chisel tips. Usually I can just pick up, as long as it's a darker color like this, I can pick up from sections and it won't streak or create too many lines. And if, like I said, usually these sections are so small, it's not super noticeable, so I don't worry about it as much in these books. I can use the chisel tip in these areas, but you have to just literally like dabbing like you're dabbing a brush with paint on it, pretty much. And there's a little bit of feathering on the piece of furniture here, but not gonna worry about it. So the bigger areas I can cover with a chisel tip. You can use other markers than Taotrees. Like I could use sometimes I'll use Copics here, sometimes I'll use Caliarts and Ohuhus. But generally for the bigger areas like these down here, for these really small detail areas, I can't get a fine enough tip on most of the markers to be able to do these successfully without there being some sort of major feathering and it looking really messy. But I would just say in these detailed books like this, Creative Haven paper is a slightly heavier weight than Amazon. So like you saw, it didn't quite soak up as much as Amazon paper would have, but it still does soak up some. So if you have a really juicy marker, like I said, the smaller the point, the better off you are for detail work. And marker does really well in Creative Haven books. Like I said, same kind of approach that I would do in an Amazon book, though. Light touches to the paper, keeping an eye out for feathering, like I said, for real detail work, going with even smaller markers. So I would say this is about the same approach as the Amazon books with markers, in my opinion, with the same markers performing probably about the same. So, all right. Quickly, we are going to show a printed page. This is from Coloring Book Cafe's Cute Country. Now we're starting to get into that heavyweight marker specific paper. And it does change how I color with the markers. So this is a 110 pound weight paper. I will put the type of paper in the description. It's one that was recommended from Colorfully Optimistic. I actually don't think I've tried anything on this before. But we're going to use some of the same markers we've been using. So the sky blue from Magic Box. I'm just going to color sections at the top. Like I said, we're a little limited on time here. So this, kind of like that glossy paper in Amazon, is designed to be allow the marker to stay wet longer on the surface, which means it's not going to soak it up. It is not going to be initially, unless you don't have to speed through coloring this one. You can go slower on this paper. However, you may have to go over it multiple times to get a smooth look, but because it's staying wet on the surface longer, you get a smoother look overall. You get less streaking. You get more opportunity to blend with the markers. So, so we'll start here. Just gonna hack away at it like I would any other paper. And I'm going along and I'm like, wow, this is kind of weird because it looks a lot streakier than it does on Amazon, right? Like, can y'all see that? You're like, boy, that's kind of weird. It's doing kind of like it did on that glossy paper, right? Like, boy, that actually looks worse than it does on the Amazon paper. And that's because it's spreading around on the surface more. It's not soaking into the paper. So if I go back over it, however, you'll still get a little bit of streakiness because, again, this is a budget-friendly marker. However, you'll notice it looks a little bit smoother than it did in the Amazon book. Not much, but some. So, like, this still feels damp to me. If this was on Amazon paper, it would already have felt, you know, fairly dry. But that actually still feels a little bit damp. So, like, you could blend with this. You could go slower to create a smoother initial surface. So like if I just went slower and I did that, you know, kind of vertical up and down line technique, look how much smoother that turns out than Amazon paper. However, like I said, a budget marker is not, you may be able to use it a little bit better on different types of paper, but if it's not got a lot of ink in it to start with or whatever, you're going to get a streaky experience across the board. Like, it really is not going to help much. Now, let's look at the Ohuhu. Color like I usually do, though I'm going slightly slower. It looks a bit streakier. However, basically this paper makes me slow down. The ink is going to stay on the surface longer. So I don't have to rush, and I can go back over sections to smooth it out. So it stays on the paper longer. And like I said, what's cool about it is if I'm sitting here coloring along and I don't like I didn't get an area quite as smoothly as I liked, I can just go back over and I don't have to worry about streaking because it's still wet. The surface is still wet. Now, this takes practice. You can see, for me, I do not normally color on marker-friendly paper. I know you would think that I would, but most of the art I like comes in the Amazon books, and I'm so lazy about, plus my printer doesn't like the heavier weight paper, that I tend to just learn how to make it work in Amazon paper then go to the trouble of printing it out on marker paper. However, if you want to blend well, like really, really learn about blending, I can hack away and make blending kind of work in Amazon paper and Creative Haven paper, but it's going to take a lot more ink and it's going to be a lot harder to do with mixed results than you would get on this paper. And so I'm hoping next week, like, we can do some blending, because I used to do a lot of marker blending, and this year I've just been really limited on time. Now there still will reach a point where the marker will still dry. Like you can see this line here, that's been sitting there for a hot minute. So, I mean, you don't have all the time in the world. However, if I go back and go over that and we give it a minute to dry, it's not as noticeable. So, like, yeah, I mean, the budget marker is kind of a similar experience, but, like, you really see, like, I guess the possibilities of the more advanced markers. Where is my... And then a Copic. So marker paper is a little less forgiving. Like if I scribble away on an Amazon regular printer page, regular printed paper, like it will soak up the ink and fill in some of the gaps where maybe I didn't get the surface as thoroughly as I did others. But like here, you have to be a lot more precise in how you color. So just the biggest thing I wanted to show from this is that not all marker coloring is the same. The approach that you use on Amazon paper is probably going to be different than what you do on more marker specific paper. So, and to show that also, Colorit books are what I call like the best marker paper type book on the market. Sorry, I hit the camera. This is from Blissful Scenes. Sorry for the glare. But you can kind of see here where I've already shown these markers, but we will do them again because I'm already in this far. Again, back to the magic box marker. The blotter page is behind this, yes. Still feel like I'm getting some streakiness again with the budget friendly marker, but what in the world is happening there? Oh, I guess, yeah, that's weird. Anyway, you can see it over here. Like, I've just used this marker a little bit, right? Like, just to color parts of a page, and I feel like it's drying out on me already. Like, it's getting streakier faster. Oh, sorry, wrong one. I was like, that's not right. Ooh blue. Again, you may have to go back over it some on the surface, but you will likely still be, you'll definitely be using less ink, and the smoother surface is kinder to your marker tips. And I mean, at some point I'm sure that will become a concern of mine if I continue to use my Copics and Amazon books, but like I just don't use them enough in there to really have noticed a big change. So like you can just see how smooth that turned out to be. And then of course your Copic level is also going to look really nice in here. You just have to go a little slower. Thoroughly cover the areas. But because they don't dry as quickly, you can go back over them without creating the lines. And again, this will be a particular skill to pick up, like when you're trying to learn how to blend. So. There's that. Looking at some of these fine little details. I know I didn't really do that on the previous page, however. And like, I put my hand on that and it still feels damp, even the magic box. So like, even this really juicy marker stays within its boundaries really well on this paper because it's not soaking up into the book as much and it's not bleeding out. I said that, and then I blindly like half colored in part of that. That wasn't bleed, that was just me not seeing where I was coloring. So this is the magic box marker. This is the one that was a little bit juicy on the side. But you still, like here, you would need to color up to the lines because it's just not going to spread like it does on Amazon paper. I try Colorit fine tip just for fun. I have it here with me. I like the Colorit fine tip better than I do the Ohuhu. It has more ink in it. I don't feel like I have to scribble as much with it like I do the Ohuhu. But again, that is personal preference. If you do a lot of detail work like this, you may prefer the precision that this gives you. If all I did was fill in, if my favorite way to color was filling in little sections like this fills, actually, you know, now that I say that, this feels a lot better in my hand on this marker paper in these fine areas. This works great. Probably the best fine tip full size marker for detail work out of all of them, in my opinion. And that's the Ohuhu, if you were wondering. Copic doesn't have a... Mine don't have fine tips, so again, it's just using the brush tip, dabbing at it like you would paint, or you could use the chisel tip. Wow, that is pretty much on the ball for like the same color, that vermilion. And this is salmon red, so that's interesting. Like, I have all these markers out, and I probably don't remember half of what I was coloring. Okay, I think that's gonna be that's gonna be it. We're gonna call it a day. So basically, just to summarize this video, I took you guys through the different types of markers out there. I got some small sets of some of the sets I talked about in the first part. We took them through like my 5 questions, and based on my experience, actually, while I'm talking about this, let me grab a Taotree marker and do this. So the extra fine tip. We talked about, you know, we took the different sets of markers through my questions. Then we talked about my tips for coloring with markers. One of the biggest, if I had to say like the biggest takeaways, always use a blotter sheet. It's going to bleed no matter how thick the paper is. You can see on this side, this is thick marker paper and it's still bleeding through. And the biggest thing is, it's not just the marker, it's the paper too. And paper, what the paper does, the paper weight and quality matters as much as the markers as that you're using. And it's never that you can't use markers on a surface, it's just you may have to use them in a different way. And that's kind of what the second part of this was. I tested a lot of these markers I tested the markers we talked about on some different types of paper, showed you how I typically color on that paper. And in doing so, hopefully showed y'all like how different it is to color on like heavier weight marker paper than it is Amazon paper. It's almost like just learning a new way to use the markers. Yeah, I'm going to still feel like the second half of this is chaotic just because I've been really tired and exhausted this weekend, but I feel better about this than I did the previous one, so we're going to go with it. So I will be in Nashville probably when this posts, being patted on the head and told I have nothing to worry about by the doctor, I'm sure. Not looking forward to that. I don't think crying's going to do any good, so we'll have to see. But I gotta try. So the third part of the series, I'm going to get a little more into, I'm hoping to have some of the pages finished and some finished pages to show you guys like how I enhance a page with markers. Like I don't do a whole ton of shading and blending, but like we're going to do some of that because I know some of you are curious, and like I'm going to show you guys like how I outline stuff with markers. It's not, I mean, it's not rocket science, but I can show y'all some of the different things. I say that, and then like we're going to do some shading and some blending. I'm going to try, there's a couple things you guys have asked for that I'm going to try to find info on. If I can't, then I will try to find somebody that's doing it. But we'll cover some of that next week, and then we'll just go from there and see where we're at. But and I should be able to show you guys some of the pages and like whether the markers have yellowed or not. I guess like I can wait for this to dry and show you guys, since we used some red in this. But mostly like that Chubby Witches book, like a couple of the books I can just show you, you know, check in with you guys and show you whether or not any of them yellowed or not. None of the markers I used should yellow today. The markers I used. So if one of them does, then I can come back and tell you guys. So hope you guys enjoyed this little bit of chaos. Y'all take care and talk to you soon. Bye for now.